This is the OFN NFL Preview podcast on the Ourlads Football Network. I'm Greg DePalma. He's Mark Lawrence at Playbook.com, and this is the Playbook.com magazine. And as of a couple of weeks ago, we were telling you that there are some pages in here that could be useless with the Big Ten and the MAC and Pac-12 and so forth canceling their seasons, but we might get some of these pages back after hearing some decent news today. Bottom line is the Playbook magazine, Mark, is available not only at playbook.com, but also some of the top bookstores in the country like Books A Million and Barnes & Nobles. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing terrific, Greg. And yes, it is good news, hopefully, with the Big Ten talking about re-entering the scene in college football for 2020. We have right now a Big Three conference. It looks like they're ready to rock and roll. So we'll see how that all shakes out. And most importantly, we've got to get the National Football League to stay on track to make sure that they're going to be ready for the start of the season.
And so far, so good. We haven't heard a whole lot of cases. I mean, we heard cases a few weeks ago when we had the list was out, but ever since that time when kind of camp got underway and we got that initial list, the only thing that's been happening is players have come off the list. We haven't heard yet, even though we know it's going to happen. Eventually it'll happen, but we have yet to hear any additional players back on the list. That's a good sign.
It's a good sign. It's also early. I think realistically we're going to see a player or two come down and test positive, and we're probably going to likely see a few more players tending to opt out and not want to play to get around their teammates and so forth and whatnot. But the bottom line here again is the league wants to play. It appears the players want to play, and football fans across the country will be thrilled if that happens.
And again, keep in mind, if they opt out now, no money, no compensation. So as of opting out prior to the deadline, they were getting some sort of financial compensation for it. So it is a big difference. But then again, that's why I think you would expect anybody that opts out now will probably be the bigger players, the guys that can afford to take a hit financially. They've just changed their mind kind of deal. I can't imagine the small guys changing their minds now because they got to earn a paycheck.
They do, and the bigger players can most afford not to play. And I think the decision for the big players deciding not to play would largely come whether or not they test positive or not.
Sure.
If they can stay clean, the league can stay clean. I don't see that happening. I don't see cleanliness being the operative word here. I can see spot cases, especially because they're not bubbling up, but I'm sure they're doing everything they can in their power to make sure that these players are first and foremost safe, and secondly, that it won't impact the game itself.
Without a preseason schedule, there really is, it's going to be more hard to analyze teams than ever before. I know some people, we always talk about this every year around this time. Some people believe that the preseason is just a complete waste and, I don't analyze anything in the preseason. It means nothing to the regular season. But every preseason, what I say is I take about 35% of what I see in the preseason because I do think that there is some carryover from the preseason from what you see to the regular season. Just the history. I've seen it happen, and that's what we use. But we don't have that this year. And now we just kind of peek in to see these highlights and hope that players don't get hurt. And then voila, the first player gets hurt. First significant player gets hurt. Gerald McCoy out for the year and kicked to the curb by the Cowboys. So it didn't even get a chance to play. A down for Dallas, and there goes McCoy.
Well, it can also be the case if they would have played preseason games, there would be more players that would also end up being hurt.
That's right.
And you've seen that a lot in the past. So, I think all in all, when you add it all together here, it's probably a little bit safer as far as the personnel, the players goes, not having to play preseason. The question is whether the conditioning will end up being a factor here early on. I'm going to look for some slow starts for these football teams to begin the season.
Okay, now we dive into the NFC West on the show today, and that means the defending NFC champs, almost defending Super Bowl champs, San Francisco. They're at the top of the list, even money to win the division, 4-1 to win the championship, and 8-1 to win the Super Bowl. Seattle's 2-1, 8-1, and 18-1. And that number, look, as I mentioned before, they were my Super Bowl pick just like a week or two before the rash of injuries to the running back position last year, as you know. And now this year, they're just a better team, especially with Jamal Adams. So I was already going to pick them. And then I see 18-1. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely taking Seattle to win the Super Bowl as one of my top teams. I think it's a very generous number for Russell Wilson, Jamal Adams, and the rest of this organization that really played as good as any team in the NFL last year until the injuries hit them. And then you've got Arizona and the Rams. And I can't believe how fast the Rams have fallen. 60-1 to win the Super Bowl. I mean, it was just a couple of years ago that they were in the Super Bowl, and now they're like 60-1's a number that you put on teams that they're not going to the Super. They're not even going to the playoffs. I mean, that's a pipe dream. It's incredible.
Well, it's all about value when it's handicapping games and odds and whatnot, Greg. And I think personally, and we'll discuss this in a little bit more in detail as we get around to each team, but I see the biggest value in this division being the LA Rams.
Yeah, why not?
At 60-1. Are you kidding me? Last year, we're going to get to them in a little bit, but you look at the yards that they put up last year, they outgained 13 of their 16 opponents they played last. They played very, very well statistically on the field last year. They're getting no credit whatsoever. They're acting like Todd Gurley moving on is going to create a big hole to that lineup. Well, the fact of the matter is Todd Gurley was really underproductive and didn't play a lot of games. So, but we'll get to them in a moment. But I think they end up being the best value in this division, largely because I don't see San Francisco winning this division. And if they don't win the division, it becomes open to anybody else.
And we'll start with the Niners because I know you're going to have some trend to give me here, but we know how difficult it is. Just look at the Rams. We know how difficult it is to go to a Super Bowl, lose the Super Bowl, and come back the following year, unless you're named the New England Patriots, and compete again for a playoff spot the next year. It's just hard statistically. A lot of teams, and I think it's got to be definitely under 50%, right? As far as teams that lose the Super Bowl that come back the next year and fail to make the playoffs.
It's been larger than that of late if you take a most recent periscope of the whole thing. But I'm going to say this about some of the things that San Francisco has got to overcome this year. First of all, at the very top, Super Bowl losers drop an average of 3 wins the next season.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep climb right out of the gate for San Francisco.
And we could see that happening because this division will be tougher.
Yes, it will be. Number 2, they're going to be the 3rd most traveled team in the National Football League this year. That's not going to work in their favor as well. And I guess you could say, okay, well, their schedule looks soft. And I mean, the people they played, they faced some winnable games. But the truth is, they faced the 4th most difficult strength of schedule if you look at the opponent's win-loss records last year. So, we've got some things here to look at against San Francisco. And the reason they won a lot of football games last year is they did a terrific job controlling the line of scrimmage. They ran the ball as good or better than anybody in the league for sure. In the NFC, Baltimore probably outrushed them because of Lamar Jackson over on the AFC side of things. But they averaged nearly 5 yards a carry. And what they did is they really took the onus, if you will, off Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo had an outstanding season per se.
No.
And
certainly didn't have a good Super Bowl.
No, he did not. And he didn't have to because they controlled the running game.
Yep.
And when I'm talking about controlling the running game, I'm talking not about just how many yards they rushed for and how many yards the opponent rushed for. It's the fact of the matter is their rush attempts per game were 2nd highest in the league, meaning that they were successful at running the football. They knew what they were going to do, and the other team couldn't stop that. So, it paved the way for a good running game and took the onus off of Jimmy Garoppolo in that sense. A lot of things fell their way last year, and my hat's off to them. They did a terrific job. There's no question about that. But I'm going to throw this right back to last year when my hometown Cleveland Browns were expected to do so much and they did so little. And one of the reasons that I was most fearful about them doing so little applies to San Francisco directly this year.
Okay.
And what it is basically is this. If a team won 4 or fewer games one year and they tripled or more than tripled that output the following year, those teams regress right back to the mean immediately after they pulled a surprising season. That was the Cleveland Browns' role last year, when so much was expected from them, but they couldn't handle the situation. And they really, really struggle in these roles when they're favored. And you're going to find the San Francisco 49er football team being favored in a lot of football games this year because of what they did last year. So if this 4-win team in 2018 plays more closer to that expectancy than they did last year's 15-win team, we can look for San Francisco to take a few steps backwards this year. Will they make the playoffs? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
They should. But if they don't, am I going to be surprised? No, because there's another team or two in this division, I think, that can take their place.
Yeah, more likely we're looking at a 10, 11-win team. That's the high barometer I think we're looking at for San Francisco. And if something else negatively happens, like if Jimmy G were to miss a couple of games, a couple of other injuries, because Deebo Samuel's injured again, where this guy gets injured too much for me. And when he's on the field, he's a fantastic football player. But they have to add more weapons, and that's why Ayuk was their number 1 draft pick at wide receiver. That was something that they had to do to improve the offense. Of course, Kittle is one of the best tight ends in football. I don't really care about Jordan Reed because he never plays, so I'm not worried about him if I'm the opposition. And you mentioned that even though the running game was so good, it's one of the situations where you have to really give it to the offensive line and the coaching staff, because Raheem Mostert came from absolutely nowhere to put together a fantastic season and was their number 1 rusher come playoff time. Now, he sure looked the part, no question, but you do have to favor the coaching staff and that offensive line, and they have to keep that a priority health-wise. They keep that offensive line healthy. They're in real good shape. They have a couple of injuries on the offensive line this season. Throw in everything else we talked about, and then maybe San Francisco has to fight and struggle to make the playoffs.
I think they do, and I think the running game is more a symptom of the style of the offense that they're running here, much like Texas Tech throws the football real well. They're going to get their passing yards. Any offense Mike Leach is a head coach of, they're going to basically lead the country in passing yards because that's all he does. And similarly, you'll find the same thing with San Francisco in the National Football League when it comes to running the football. They did exceptionally well last year, but I think there's now suddenly game film on them to be seen and had. All their success they met with last year is going to be countered by a lot of opposing coaches that are going to be under the microscope taking a look at what they did and why they got away with what it is they did. And I think that's going to end up being an uphill battle for San Francisco.
Yeah, I think the weakness of the Niners on paper on the offensive line is their interior. I think if you come up against a defense that can really probably pressure up the middle, I think they can expose San Francisco at times. But McGlinchey on the right side, and then they made the trade for Trent Williams. So those guys have to stay healthy. If something happens with either one of those players, especially McGlinchey, then that's when I think that it might be some trouble. Defensively, you also lose to Forrest Buckner. Buckner's gone. So they try to replace him with Kinlaw, their other first-round draft pick, who they received with the deal from the Colts. Still a really good defensive line with Bosa. Kinlaw is going to be a really good player, you got to believe. But you take out Buckner, and that is a big, big loss. We'll see how much that affects him. Richard Sherman's also a year older. So we'll find out whether or not Richard Sherman still has that number 1 ability. And overall, I still think San Francisco's, because of injuries and inconsistency, I still think that secondary is vulnerable.
I think it is too. In fact, if you take a look at those losses that you mentioned, what puzzled me a little bit was the secondary when they went to the draft. They didn't even attempt to address that. So, what happens here this football season here, perhaps Shanahan believes that the players are better than what they showed last year. It doesn't show particularly in their stats. They only allowed 179 passing yards last year, but it doesn't mean that they're a really good pass defense either. So this is a defense also that improved appreciably last year, over 60 yards a game. So you've got that to say what goes up usually comes down, and this team went up that way defensively, and they went up dramatically offensively to the rush. So again, not to be a spoil sport, and I do like what San Francisco put together here. I think Joey Bosa has really helped this football team, but it's my adage of returning to the mean. And when you've got all these bullets in your holster, you might as well load a few of them up and use them, because I think San Francisco is going to end up shooting themselves in the foot this year.
If you're a Niner fan, you have a great future and present ahead of you. You have a nice combination of Shanahan and Lynch. That means they're going to be successful for a very long time, as long as you keep the two of those guys together. It's just, we're talking about the history of losing the Super Bowl. It just happens. And you don't think it's going to happen every year, because teams that get to the Super Bowl are obviously very good teams, and yet the next year it happens. And that's where injuries also come into play, because teams that get to the Super Bowl usually don't have a lot of injuries. That's why they get to the Super Bowl. But can you be lucky that second year and not sustain injuries? And that also comes into play.
On the other side of the coin, most of those teams that made it to the Super Bowl, that lost the Super Bowl game, were not upstart football teams, as San Francisco was last year.
Double point, yes.
Exactly. So they're in a little bit, like you say, of a double jeopardy type situation here this year. So if they can overcome all these hurdles, and there are a lot of them, okay, tip of the hat to them. Job well done. They will have gotten me. But I have to play the percentages, and the percentages for me say that San Francisco struggles this year.
Especially when you take a look at the odds for the championship and the Super Bowl double to Seattle. Because when Seattle played San Francisco last year, the games were fantastic and could have went either way. Matter of fact, Seattle was the better team by just a little bit, where they could have won both games. They split, but they came really close to winning both games. And then the injuries came for Seattle, and they were not the same team. So now Seattle comes back. Here comes Jamal Adams. Pretty much you got a team that is just going to get older, because DK Metcalf is a year older. You got the Carson comes back, but you also smartly add Carlos Hyde to the backfield. And then you draft DJ Dallas. So now you are making sure that if you have a couple of injuries at running back, you still have a couple of more, so you don't have to try to go out and get Marshawn Lynch, because that's not something that Seattle is going to be successful at. They also lost their tight ends last year. Disley had a big start to the season, so you bring in Parkinson, who is a fantastic talent out of Stanford. You also sign Greg Olsen. And then the offensive line, I think, is going to be okay, because it's been bad in years past, but Dwayne Brown's been there. They went out and they got Shell. They drafted Lewis, so I think their offensive line is going to be fine. I look at this offense as being one of Russell Wilson's best.
Well, I'm a huge Russell Wilson fan, and he's a deserved Hall of Fame quarterback, and he never seems to regress. It's amazing, but every year he's very impressive. He was impressive again last football season here, despite the fact that Seattle played a lot of close call football games. Of their 12 wins they had last year, 11 of them were by 8 or fewer points, which means that those wins could have well flipped the other side had things not gone their way. They were also very fortuitous, if you will, with the strength of schedule that they had last year. Now this year, it remains to be seen with Jadeveon Clowney. Looks for all intents and purposes like he'll a free agent out somewhere. Yep. So will that loss be meaningful? A player that has the talent of Jadeveon Clowney is never good to lose. I realize he's injured a lot and a little bit of a cancer in the locker room, but the bottom line is when he's healthy, I mean, he's arguably the best defensive player in the National Football League. So you suddenly have to entertain losing him that way this year as well. The one thing I see from a scheduling standpoint, they're going to take on the NFC East this year. Now, good news is they've dominated the NFC East. They've won the money 6 times in a row, the last 6 games they played them. The bad news is they have to take a couple of trips over to the NFC East. And that's never good for a West Coast team to have to do just that. Then you also you throw in the fact that they're going to also be visiting Miami. They're going to go to Atlanta. They're in amongst Buffalo.
That's a lot of trips to the East Coast.
Yes, it is. So what does that do? The air miles start ringing up for this football team here. So they've got to stay healthy. The injury bug bit them a bit last year, and they were able to overcome that. They can't afford to be injured again 2 years in a row with this tough scheduling situation that they have coming up here this football season here, and the fact that I feel that they did win quite a few games, either I'm going to say luckily or with some smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I mean, just think about it. Just think if San Francisco had lost. They did lose one of their running backs, but let's say that they would have lost their top 2 running backs, Mostert and Breida. Let's say they were in a situation where they had to get a running back from the practice squad for the last 3 games of the regular season. I'm sorry, but I'm not, even as good as that offensive line is, I'm not so sure they make the Super Bowl. So it just shows you the injury factor. And then Clowney, I think he only played like about 56% of the defensive snaps last year. So it wasn't like he was on the field all year. And yes, he did have a share of injuries, no question. They add Jordan Brooks on defense. They add Darrell Taylor on defense and Alton Robinson through the draft. They got a couple other key guys through free agency. The kid Mayowa and also Bruce Irvin. So I think those were good pickups. So I think the defense is going to be better. And then how can the defense not be that much more improved when you add Jamal Adams?
Yeah, that was a big pickup for them. They obviously, they franchised their future with him, giving up a couple of number 1 draft picks to do just that. But, I think they felt internally that this football team is going to be in a prime position to make a move to claim that first spot in this division here this year. And if indeed they are, if Pete Carroll's right about that, that addition could end up being the best addition of any team in the offseason. He is that good. The question is, was it too high of a price to pay?
They're going to miss Dunbar, I think, maybe more than the Giants missed Baker, because Baker hadn't been the player that Dunbar was last year. Dunbar had a breakout campaign. And just imagine Seattle secondary if Dunbar was allowed to play too. So that's one loss that will hurt them. But you know what? Maybe that's part of the reason why they went out and decided, hey, it's worth it for us to go out and get Adams. Let's keep in mind too, the first round draft picks that they gave up for the Jets are going to be late first rounders, really late, as long as they play like we think they're going to play over the next few years. And it's not like Seattle has this great history over the last several years of drafting really good talent in first-round draft picks anyway. So I think it was a smart move by both teams when it was all said and done. But, yeah, I think Seattle is definitely poised to maybe have a little bit more luck on as far as the injury factor. And that's why this would be my pick. If I'm going to pick them to win the Super Bowl, I'm definitely going to pick them to win the division.
Well, one other note I'm going to sprinkle in here, is the fact that they're a very well-coached football team. Pete Carroll, Hall of Fame football coach, but they don't beat themselves. And if you go back the last 3 years, 51 games they played, only 3 of those games have they had more than 2 turnovers. That's a lot to do with Russell Wilson protecting the football on the offensive side of the ball. He makes smart decisions. And if he continues to keep doing that, you could end up cashing your ticket.
All right, now let's go with Arizona, because stats-wise, well, if you're looking just at odds, they're actually the 3rd choice because of the Super Bowl odds. And that means that, look, I think most people were pretty impressed with what they saw out of Kyler Murray. Any first-round rookie quarterback is going to struggle. For the most part, though, I think he looked pretty poised for a rookie. He made his mistakes. They had their losses, but they were competitive in games. They weren't this laughing stock. I think a lot of people thought Cliff Kingsbury coming over was ridiculous. How could you hire a guy that's under 500 record in college football? Can't even win in college. How is he going to win the pros? That kind of stuff. But they turned things around slowly. And that was important because they were a disaster the year prior. I mean, it was just a complete mess. That's why the coach was one and done. You could say what you want, but I know there was a lot of, well, how come the black guy only gets 1 year and then the white guy with no winning track record in college gets to be hired? I'm sorry. I mean, if you think Arizona cares about that stuff, that's just ridiculous. Fact is that Arizona's coaching staff was in way over their heads. They made the smart moves, sort of like what happened with Kitchens in Cleveland last year. When you know the guy is in over their heads, you got to cut bait quickly before it gets any worse. So I applaud Arizona for that. Now, is Cliff Kingsbury the guy to take this team to a playoffs and more? It's debatable. We'll find out. But another year with Kyler Murray. They drafted Josh Jones. That was important because the offensive line still has some issues I think that they have to overcome. That's still the Beachum signing was underrated because I still think he's a very solid player. They got him for cheap. And they have all those weapons at wide receiver, including, of course, the DeAndre Hopkins trade, which a lot of people believe was the big steal of the century. And then Drake played awfully well, and him. He played, of course, with the Dolphins before he headed off to Arizona. So I expect Arizona offensively is going to take a big step forward.
Well, they're expected to do just that, and for all the reasons you mentioned. Kyler Murray just improved as the season wore on. The first month of the season, he was disastrous. I mean, they didn't even come close. They started winless in their first 4 football games. But things did turn around for them, the stick-to-itiveness that they had. He really persevered. My main concern about him is that in his decision not to stay in the pocket, and he doesn't do that because he's not a very physically statuesque type quarterback.
He's small.
Yes, he is. He's diminutive, okay? But he was sacked 48 times last year. That nobody other quarterback in the league was sacked more than he was. So that's going to they're going to have to cut that number way back this football season here this year. The addition of DeAndre Hopkins should be huge for him. He gives him a real legitimate go-to target. And that's huge when you got a quarterback that thinks and quarterbacks in the style in which he does. The one thing about this football team is they're adding talent here. You can remember, I don't think people realize this, but you can go back to 2015 and 2014. They were a playoff team back-to-back years.
Oh, yeah, under Arians.
Under Bruce Arians, exactly right. Okay, so he's gone, and obviously things went downhill with this football program afterwards. But is Cliff Kingsbury the guiding light that they need? I know he's young, and the players can relate to him, but the guy never won in college, and I was really baffled at the hire. I really, truly was. Now he was hired because of Murray. And, Murray can run his offense, and that's basically what the whole game plan here is. So, this team will go as far as Kyler Murray goes. If he gets sacked 48 times again this football season here, there's a good chance he may not play all 16 games this year as well. So there's things to like and things not to like about this football team here. I like the way that they didn't throw the white flag in last football season here. The offense picked it up almost 100 yards a game. That's what Murray was drafted for, to do just that. But my concern was the defense. It regressed almost 50 yards. So if they can tighten the defense up a little bit here, this is a football team that I think has a chance to play 500 ball this year.
Yeah, what they need is they need some of their younger players that they drafted to step up. They drafted Zach Allen last year, Byron Murphy last year, especially in that secondary where you have Murphy and Patrick Peterson. Patrick Peterson needs to show that he's still an elite corner. And then the Simmons draft pick is huge. That's a guy that can transform your defense. He can do so many things that just is so atypical for that position. But there's more talent on defense, more young talent. And now, and look, Vance Joseph may not be a really good head coach, but he's been a pretty good defensive coordinator.
He's been a really good defensive coordinator. So, to me, this is collectively one question. This team goes as Kyler Murray goes.
Sure.
And for him being the top choice in the National Football League draft last year, at the beginning it looked like it was a shaky selection, but by season's end, he kind of proved himself out. And I know they're excited about that. So there's a buzz in Arizona this year. But for them to have to ascend, you're going to have to see San Francisco and Seattle regress. And the combination of two of those is a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit unlikely.
Yeah.
It's rather unlikely here. So if one of them do, Arizona moves up a notch or two, but both of them, I don't think so.
Yeah, the NFC is not as tough as the AFC this season, but there are other teams that are there's a ton of teams in the same area where Arizona is. They're on the outside trying to get in, and it's tough when you're talking about those percentages. Again, we go back to injuries and so forth, but I like the fact that when you compare them to those other teams, they've got the young quarterback, second year in the system. You add in some key pieces, and like you said, they got better and they fought hard as the season wore on. So there are some positive things to think that this will be a team that will get better. Now, will that happen wins and losses, or will it just be, yeah, they're better, but the record is only a win or two more? Chances are it all depends also on what happens with the Rams.
I
Because
agree 100%. I think this football team could get better, and we might not see it in their win-loss record. They might have those 5, 6 wins again this football season here. I also want to jump in here and say that I think they had one of the steals of the draft when Josh Jones fell to them in the third round. Big tackle out of Houston, and that's exactly what Kyler Murray needs.
Yep.
So if he can end up being that guy for this football team, he can end up being, if you will, the bodyguard for Kyler Murray here. That'll be a big boost for this football program.
Yeah, and again, I think that it was a smart move to bring in Beachum, because Beachum is a solid player, and Humphreys was re-signed, and he's a guy that they want him to be the mainstay at left tackle, but he hasn't been able to prove that. So if they feel like he's not, if they feel Josh Jones is ready to play every game and they're willing to stick him out there week one and he's the guy, then Beachum might be able to push Humphreys. At least it gives them more depth. Again, Arizona's offensive line has been really weak over the last few years, so talent-wise, it has improved this offseason.
Well, you look at the first portion of their schedule here, Greg, also here. They're going to open up at Frisco, and that's probably, you can put an L next to their name there, unless they surprise and San Francisco regresses right away. Then
that was actually a competitive game when they played him last year, wasn't it?
Yes, it
was. In San Francisco.
Okay, and they've had good success against them point spread-wise. They've cashed 4 straight tickets in a row. They've won 3 in a row in Frisco. So, it could be favorable for Arizona in that particular matchup. The other part is they go home to host Washington and Detroit, and those look like they're certainly going to be favored in both of those football games. So if they open up 2-1 to begin the football season here, then they go on a 3-game road trek. That's going to be, I think, the decisive part and portion of their schedule. When they go to Carolina, they go to New York to take on the Jets, and they go to Dallas to play the Cowboys on a Monday Night Football game. If they can somehow, with those 3 road games early on in the football season, 3 of their first 6 games, facing that 3-game road trek, if they can come out of all of this at 3-3, or perhaps play well and even be 2-4, psychologically it could be a big boost for this football team. But God forbid if they go 1-5, then suddenly they're looking in the mirror and saying, what happened to last year's effort?
And I might not even, and it's quite possible that if the team regresses by the end of the season, that they will be looking for a new head coach.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, he was brought in here for one purpose, and that was for Kyler Murray. And if Kyler Murray does not improve, if Kyler Murray regresses, that instantly puts Cliff Kingsbury on the hot seat. So, there's a lot of factors that are going to be determined by the success or the lack of success by this football team this year.
All right, let's wrap it up with the Rams. And again, a 60-1 pick to win the Super Bowl. Arizona 45-1. Both teams are 6-1 and 20-1 respectively, but that's the difference. The Rams are 60-1 to win the Super Bowl after getting there a couple of years ago. And then last year they had the Gurley injury situation. And I don't think there was any question that Jared Goff, that Super Bowl, it definitely damaged him because he wasn't the same last year. And you wonder if teams have kind of figured him out and the offense with him, because Jared Goff, I think the talent is there, but mentally upstairs, I just don't know if he has what it takes in these big games against big defensive teams. But the numbers are there. They still put up big numbers, and that's why it's up to the defense. The defense really, and I don't know, the offensive line also, they had some veterans that I think kind of hurt them in some key situations, but defensively, because the Rams are still going to score defensively, they have to be as good as they were when they won the Super Bowl, and they just weren't last year.
No, they weren't. They took a big step backwards and surprised a lot of people in doing just that. And Jared Goff is one of those quarterbacks that, first round selection in the National Football League draft, despite having a losing record in college football. So,
Yeah.
they looked at him and saw his physical ability and went with that rather than his mental approach about the football game and doing whatever it takes to win football games. Now, Sean McVay brought, I think, the best of him out in that early on in the first 3 seasons that McVay was with the team, but it caught up with him last year. So I think it's all on Sean McVay this football season here. He's the one that's going to have to make these adjustments for this football team here. This is still a football team. If you take a look at them, they've won 35 games the last 3 years, and you've got 60-1 odds on them
I know.
to win their division. Are you kidding
Crazy.
me? That's where the value comes. Okay, and while everybody scoffs about Jared Goff and the Rams' poor performance last year, they were still a 9-win football team. They still won 9 games last year. So, they've got them projected this football season here to not even do that this year. So their season win total is 8.5 when it opened up in Vegas. So there's a lot of people in Vegas and a lot of football fans that don't like what they saw from the Rams last year. But I'm not so fast to jump ship on this football team here right now. I think Sean McVay, I think he's a terrific head coach, and I do believe he will make these adjustments.
Yeah, if you look at again, it was interesting because the Rams' offensive line before last year went 2 years with their starters without an injury. Last year, that all changed. This is what we talk about. You can only do that so often. It's going to catch up to you. And it caught up to the Rams last year on the offensive line because they had new guys that had to step in. Then those guys got hurt. And then they had other new guys that had to step in, backups with not a lot of experience. They didn't perform all that well. That was a big problem. They couldn't really, and again, you could say what you want about Gurley, but it was a combination of Gurley and also the offensive line. They didn't have those really easy running games to open things up and make it easy for Goff. It just didn't happen last year. They lose Cooks this year. That's a big loss because I know Woods has come along nicely, but Cooper Kupp got hurt last year too. That was a huge loss. They draft Van Jefferson, so that's a nice pickup. They also drafted Cam Akers, so they might actually be better at running back with Gurley, gone and the injuries, and Darrell Henderson in his second year. Defensively, some of those guys that are gone, Marcus Peters, Aqib Talib, Eric Weddle, some of those guys were a little bit older too, especially Talib and Weddle. Maybe, they draft a couple of guys, including Burgess, but they need Jalen Ramsey to step up because they gave up a lot for him. They need him to step up and prove that he's still, or can be again, one of the elite corners in the league. If he can do that, that is a huge bonus for them. If he doesn't, in the days of Jalen Ramsey, he was a 1-year wonder, they're in big trouble.
Yeah, they put into Ramsey what Seattle has put into Jamal Adams. They're basically sacrificing a lot of the future. But I'm going to go on record as saying this. I think that if there's a sneaker rookie of the year in the National Football League this year, I'm going to look long and hard at Cam Akers. Because if he is as good as his ability was when he went to Florida State, and maybe perhaps you can make the case that he didn't live up to that ability, but the fact of the matter is at Florida State, they had some wretched football teams there.
Yes.
Okay, there was a lot of ugliness going on there. He didn't have much of an offensive line to run behind at all. And I think Sean McVay saw that, and that's what he saw in this, in the move of unloading Gurley and drafting Cam Akers. I think he's going to become a vital cog on this football team. And if he has the kind of year that I think he has, I'm not talking Alvin Kamara type of a sleeper running back, but I'm talking somebody who is at least going to be in the Rookie of the Year mention. And if he is, I think the LA Rams could be back this year.
Also, Fowler is a loss, no question for them. The pressure player. They bring in Leonard Floyd. Floyd never became the star player the Bears envisioned when they drafted him as high as they did in the first round. Maybe a change of scenery will do him good. And let's also keep in mind that Wade Phillips, that whole Wade Phillips thing was kind of interesting because maybe McVay just kind of felt which is normal. Hey, I need a veteran defensive coordinator who's got a lot of experience, a winning defensive coordinator, somebody with head coaching experience as well on my team. Now it's been a couple of years. I can now I need to bring someone in new and younger. And that's what he did when he brought in Brandon Staley, who's the linebacker coach the last 3 years under Vic Fangio. So we have no idea if this Staley coach is just a coach or whether he's truly learned something from Fangio. Because that's one of those things where you never know. Maybe he's found a diamond in the rough as a defensive coordinator.
Well, it really sounds like there was a disconnect there between Sean McVay and Wade Phillips, a couple of generational gaps there, if you will.
To say the least.
And, yeah, and that could well have led to that move that they made. And it was a move I think it's going to end up helping the football team here in the long run. They didn't regress all that bad or play all that poorly defensively last year. And as I mentioned early on in the beginning of the show, they went toe-to-toe with a lot of teams last football season here. Their defense slipped a little bit, and it was largely because that running game just kind of dissipated. If they get that running game back here this football season here, and if replacing Phillips, as you mentioned, with Staley ends up being a good positive move, I think this football team is got second place written on them in the NFC West.
All right. So, yeah, I think we both agree. I think, like I said, Seattle's definitely my pick for a Super Bowl. They're one of my picks. I'll put money on, invest 18-1 number. And I see no reason not to put the Rams in that category of 5 or 6 long shots where you put a little bit of money and hope you get a nice little big payout, especially if they get off to a good start. Because even if they get off to a good start at 60-1, if they play, you got to tell me what their schedule is quick because we only have about a minute or two. If they get off to a good start, that even if that number starts coming down, it's still going to be so high where that could be all the proof you need to say, hey, I'm all in. I'm going to reinvest a little bit more money on them. I still can get 20-1 on them. And now all of a sudden you got a really good investment.
Well, they're going to open up at home against Dallas, and if they can pull the rug on the Cowboys, it's a good start for the team. They go to Philadelphia the week after. That could be a real tough visit. Then they got Buffalo, the Giants, and Washington. Those could be 3 wins for this football team. So realistically, if they go 3-2 to start the season, I think they're feeling awfully good. 4-1, I think, puts them on the trail that they want to be on.
Playbook.com. Here it is. Here's the magazine. There's the guy, Mark Lawrence. Mark, we're going to wrap up our series next week with the AFC West. And then it's off to our preseason predictions, and we go on the record with our Super Bowl picks, our futures, and all of that. So can't wait. We'll wrap it up next week with the AFC West.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it, Greg. There's a lot to talk about in the AFC West. Patrick Mahomes and company. A lot of good football will be played in that particular division this year. We'll talk about it next week.
Mark Lawrence, I'm Greg DePalma. We'll see you next time right here on OFN NFL Preview.